Welcome to the WellCast. The world has a lot to say. We're bringing a biblical perspective to those conversations.
Welcome back to another episode of the WellCast. I am Mike Cirasoni, and I am joined, as always, by the one and only, my little buddy, Jordan Hogue.
LB Jordan.
What's up,
Boost
buddy?
Boys back at it with this world religions thing.
That's
we are
right.
finishing up this week.
The last one.
Yeah, man.
I mean, it's not all the religions in the world.
The last religion. Yeah. All of 8. Yeah.
All the 8 of them.
There are many ones, but we've been covering the major world religions.
Yeah, and we are ending today.
Yeah.
Sorry. You're probably starting to well up in tears right now if you're listening to this. But don't worry. We got another...
And those of you who weren't interested, welcome back.
Yeah, we got another series coming up next. We're going to surprise you with.
Yeah. We think it's going to be a really good one.
It is. You're going to love it.
As anyone says who is doing their own, says the podcast salesman.
Yes,
Yeah.
This is the best podcast.
You're not going to
ever.
want to listen to this one, you know? You're going to like this podcast. I guarantee it.
Oh, now we're the only ones listening to ourselves.
Yeah, that's cool.
All right. Well, we're glad that you're here listening with us. We are talking about the major world religion of Hinduism today. So we're finishing up the Far East major religions with Hinduism. A drastic difference, really, from last episode where we talked about Buddhism.
Yeah.
This is a very different religion from Buddhism. I think purposely
They
so.
get thrown in the same bucket because of similar systems,
Yeah.
but they are very different.
Right. They both incorporate reincarnation, but
Karma.
yeah, but there's a lot of differences, especially when it comes to the idea of God.
So I spent about almost a whole semester in India,
Yeah.
and
Did you
I was
develop
exposed to.
love for Indian food while you were there?
I did.
Okay.
Actually, yeah, big time. Once you get past your first bout of food poisoning, it is a.
What was that like? Our listeners want to know about your food poisoning.
Lots of Gatorade, lots of time at home alone.
Good.
And I mean, if anybody's ever been to India, they can tell you it is very otherworldly from America.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, truly, when you build your entire society on a religious system like Hinduism,
Right.
it is very, very different. And so I think, but the people are so beautiful. The country is, has a near and dear place in my heart.
Yeah.
I think you said something similar to this in the last episode, but you feel a sense of like palpable otherness when around every corner is a giant statue.
Yeah.
And in every house is a small one.
Right.
And every family has their own separate sort of deities that they worship because of some story. You have Shiva on every corner in some capacity. There is a looming presence of Hinduism in this place, and you get to these city centers, and you see people sort of leaving offerings in these places, and
It's got to be so different because I imagine it's different, similar to Cambodia, where I mean the Buddhist religion is 93% of the religion in the country. So it really is a Buddhist country. I'm assuming India is very similar. Like there's a large a large contingency. I mean 784 million people in India.
yeah, you have. I mean, obviously, you have upwards of 1 billion people in India, but I think predominantly Hindu.
That's like 75%.
Yeah,
maybe even more.
The whole government is built on Hinduism, I mean, you have Islam and you have Sikhism, which is sort of an offshoot a long time ago of Hinduism, and Buddhism. But I think, it was an incredible experience. I think the hospitality of the Hindi people, there's a lot of different things that I can speak on that, but I felt it very personally going there. And the missionaries there, they were incredibly adept at speaking to Hinduism because it is systematically similar to Buddhism, of an entirely different worldview from Christianity. There's not a lot of borrowedness, because Hinduism is also a very, very, very old religion,
very
right?
old. So like that anywhere from like 2500 BC.
Yeah.
Like that's a long time ago
Yeah.
to 1500 BC. So sometime in that 1,000-year period Hinduism started, and
Yeah.
there's no obvious founder, but somewhere at some time it started. And
Well, I say we get into it,
Yeah.
structure of beliefs, things like that, an
Sure.
understanding of Hinduism would be important.
yeah, so they have actually a vast set of scriptures.
Yeah,
and
I think that'd be something that's very different than a lot of the major world religions in that it's almost as broad as the religion is,
Yeah.
right? Because you have 333 million acknowledged gods or deities within Hinduism,
Yep.
all made up of this presence that they would call Brahma.
Yeah, and there's almost a universalist feel to the definition of Brahma, right? So you can worship anything, nature and people and events, like they're and even just made up gods of the sea and God of love, and it has a very honestly like a Greek and Roman feel, but almost like times a million.
Yeah, there's a pantheism to it, right?
Yeah.
Which is that, so if you were to think of it as a structure, what's interesting is I did meet Hindus who, they actually claim that there was a monotheistic religion in that Brahma is everything and in everything,
Right.
and Brahma's expression through certain things are these gods.
Right.
So, I mean, that's open for debate. That's kind of an in-house debate, and I don't feel like we have a lot to speak into that. But it presents as a largely polytheistic religion that has its source in one thing. And so if you'd say, like you said, right, there is a god of the waves, there's a god of the sea, there's a god of fish, there's a god of the things in the sea, there's the sand, the beaches, the trees,
flowers.
And all of that would be, there's God in everything. And in contrast to Christianity, where we say that God is everywhere, but God is not that bush.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And so, but they would say there is a God of that bush, and he is in that bush, and I am in that bush. Like, it's kind of everything.
Yeah. And the idea behind Brahma is an interesting departure from the Christian God as well, because Brahma is the one God who's ultimate, but he's also impersonal and unknowable. And so he basically is everything and is in everything, but he has no care for the people that worship him.
Yeah, I feel like there's a level of appeasement in this religion where almost like animistic or voodoo type religions, where you people in India would wear all these charms and these bracelets and these things on them and amulets, and there's a belief that the impersonalness of Brahma leads to a desire to be appeased. So you have the karmic system, which is also impersonal. It's simply just a weight of good and bad, and that determines what's next. But then you have these individual spirits and these individual gods and these things that lived in everything. And you had to, maybe if you wanted something from them, then you would perform a ritual, you would wear an amulet, you would wear these bracelets, these things, in order to gain their favor, similar to a lot of the old like Nordic gods, similar to a lot of the Greek system that you were talking about, even the Roman religions and pagan religions. And so it's super, super vast partly because it is so old and unguided, right?
Yeah. And the way that they worship these gods varies also. I mean, it can be through offerings or fasting or dancing or just even like symbolism and statues and all of that.
And in India, I saw some pretty dark things too.
Yeah.
There were places where, up until very recently, and there are places where this is still possibly practiced in secret, but there's a part of the Hindu writings which says that if you are to die, your widow would be burned. And there were temples where they would take women who were widowed and burn them based on the teachings of Hinduism.
Wow.
And so, like, there would be things like that, or sacrifice, or, sacrifice is not necessarily a part of their larger religion anymore, but it was until up to 500 or 600 years ago. I don't know if it's always people, but there's at least animals, things like that.
Yeah, and what's interesting, there are two main expressions of Brahma that most Hindus worship together. So we're talking Krishna and Rama. So those are the two main kind of expressions of Brahma that are pretty universal amongst Hindus.
Yeah, I had a neighbor in India in one of the places we stayed that had said like, "Oh, we believe in the Trinity too," and I was like, "What?"
Yeah,
because I'd been taught it was millions and millions of gods, right?
Yeah, that's interesting.
He said, "Well, basically, there's Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva."
Okay.
And I was like, "Oh, that's interesting."
Yeah.
I didn't know that. And so, like I said, you had said there's two. He had said there's three.
Yeah.
People would say there's one. There's also millions. It's just as broad as it is old.
And I actually misspoke. Those are two of Vishnu's incarnations. So it's almost like it's a tree.
It's turtles all the way down, man.
Yeah,
it just keeps going.
It's a hierarchy of gods, and what's interesting is the worship of these gods is mostly, in contrast to Christianity, is mostly individualistic. So it's not corporate. They don't gather together to worship. It's mostly individualistic, and that's because of how they view creation, right? I mean, so the idea of creation is an interesting concept because they actually reject the idea of creation.
Yeah.
There's no, if there's an impersonal God that is in and is all things, the pantheistic, definition of God, then creation is not something you can sustain. Like, you can't believe in creation because there's an impersonal God. And so that impersonal God is the one in Hinduism is the one truth of existence. So only Brahma exists. And the idea is everyone else is an illusion, which is an interesting belief.
It can be kind of solipsist, right? Which is a philosophical belief that you're the only thing that actually exists.
Yeah. And it's fascinating because Shayna, who's my admin, she and I, we like to joke around about Elon Musk and how he basically just came out and said, like, potentially we could all be in...
We're just in a simulation.
Some sort of simulation. And
he's like hoping for it at this point.
He's like, if not, like, we're going to get there eventually where we're all in simulation. And it's just an interesting concept because that's what I think of when I think of the idea of humanity within this belief system is it's basically Brahma and a simulation of every, but then at some point that breaks down too, right? Because they not only do they believe in this illusion that Brahma's created, that there's no beginning, that there's no end, that history is kind of not even valuable to think through because it's all based on an illusion. But that breaks down when we get to kind of their belief system in salvation. Because the goal is, because we've talked about karma and reincarnation, and that's very much a part of this faith system, this belief system also. But, even though there's no clear concept of salvation, they do get to a place where they believe this illusion of personal existence will end, and then somehow they'll become real as they become one with the impersonal God. So the illusion stops, and now they become somehow one with
Brahma.
And so it's a fascinating thought as you think through their definition of both who God, or all three of who God is, what it looks like to be created or to exist, and then their concept of life and the afterlife and what that looks like. It's somewhat tough to understand, but it's also fascinating to walk through.
Yeah, I think to where Buddhism would be like it's almost like so different, it's similar in some ways, right? Where you have Buddhism says you just cease, like there's nothing, right?
And there's no God.
Yeah, and this says that there is God, but you just become part of him and you go back to him.
You're
right?
absorbed kind of into him.
There's an amoeba God. And so I think there's there's a part of me that's like, I remember hearing people talk about their beliefs in India and being like, I kind of understand why you would want that.
Yeah.
You know, like there is, and I think this is the side of Hinduism that the West has really, really grabbed onto. And they have like sort of taken all of the things that maybe are the eat, pray, love pieces of this religion, which says like, oh yeah, there's spiritual devotion. There's a belief that God's in everything, that there's value to things because of the karmic path. Like, and then we have superimposed sort of our values on top of it and said like, well, the other things which, you know, the karmic traditions produce, like, do you know about the caste system in India? So, India is still organized around a caste system,
Right.
which is a karmic tradition in Hinduism, which says that if you are born in a higher class with more abilities, rights, money, you know, then you deserve that based on karma.
Yeah,
right?
because good actions create good consequences in the next life, and bad actions create bad consequences in the next life. So basically, you are a part of that caste system because you deserve to be there.
Yeah. So there is also a breakdown in ideas of justice and tradition.
Yeah.
Many people would argue that Gandhi got his, like, a lot of his teachings on an understanding of social justice from Jesus. And he carried a copy of the Sermon on the Mount with him everywhere. And so, like this, I would say, again, if you have senses of social justice in India or in the Hindu system, then they come from something outside of it.
Yeah.
Because what I saw were the Dalit people, and I worked a lot with the Dalit people, who they say, well, their karmic weight is so heavy that they're lower than animals.
Yeah.
And these people, if their shadow crossed someone of a higher caste on the street, they were allowed to beat them in the street.
Yeah.
They couldn't kill them. Oh, thank God. But they beat them.
Yeah.
And most of the time they weren't allowed shoes because that was a luxury. They had to beg for their things. Oftentimes people would throw their money, so they had to go get them. They couldn't hand it to them because they touched it.
Yeah.
They would be ritualistically unclean. This is built without compassion for the understanding of, oh, well, that person is where they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
I saw a person get in a motorcycle accident and nobody touched them. And I didn't understand. And the missionary told me they're waiting for those who are blessed in the system to come and to treat this person so that they don't inherit their karma, because they believe they deserved to get hurt in this moment. And that they would then inherit their bad karma by helping them escape the consequences of their actions.
Yeah, and that's interesting because the idea is that karma then leads to the consequences of karma are a part of this samsara system, which is the cycle of birth, death, and reincarnation. And so, because of karma, you enter into, not because of karma, but karma is the driving force in what you receive as you're reborn in this reincarnation. And then the goal of the Hindu faith is really to experience the release or the freedom of this samsara, this birth and death and reincarnation, and to escape that cycle is the ultimate goal of life for the Hindu, or for someone who is practicing Hinduism. And so the goal is what's called moksha. And it's this possibility of attaining liberation from this cycle of samsara.
Yeah, that's their version of enlightenment. Salvation.
But what's interesting, and where it comes to bear on Western culture now, is one of those ways that Hinduism purports to allow you to be a part of this release or this freedom is through the practice of yoga, which is interesting because I think there's a lot of our listeners who practice yoga. And I don't want to get into a whole theology on yoga, whether or not we should or shouldn't. Actually, I kind of do. What do you think? I mean, it's a practical conversation.
Yeah.
Like Christians doing yoga. What do you think about that?
Well, I think if I'm just off the top of my head here, I think what kind?
Yeah.
So you have to ask yourself, like, am I doing, because there's like, yoga videos on YouTube that I've done with my wife where it's literally just like me sweating in my living room.
Stretching.
And we're like, yeah. And then, the lady says like, all right, peace be with you. And then it's done. And we're like,
You're
nice.
like, also with you.
Yeah, high five.
For our Catholic friends.
But I think we've all been to or had some experience or seen in media something where it's like, I think this is much more geared towards a spiritual experience.
Yeah.
And you have to ask yourself, what are you exposing yourself to?
Yeah. Or opening another word for exposing is opening yourself up to, right?
Yeah.
Because all false religions are from the enemy. And so I do think that there's I think you're absolutely right. I think you're on the right track, because I think that as I've kind of thought through this, I think there is a benefit to some of the poses that you do, right? You're like in the pink flamingo pose. I don't even know if that is a pose. Yeah. But you're, downward dog's great for my hamstrings.
You're like, okay, right? I was stretching and oh no, I hit a yoga pose.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't necessarily, although I would say probably Hinduism does lead to like the poses are spiritual, I don't necessarily think that's as much of a risk for Christians.
And it is possible to sort of have an endless thought train with this, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to ask yourself, why am I doing it?
Yeah.
What is the purpose of it? What am I exposing myself to? And because ultimately, if you traced every single thing back to its origin,
right,
it's a pretty muddy puddle.
Yeah.
And you don't know where everything came from that you participated in.
Well, and I think about it similarly to how I think about meditation, right? I mean, meditation in and of itself is a big part of these Far Eastern religions, right? I mean, there's a huge focus on meditation.
Yeah, I think they called it like the way of knowledge and meditation.
Yeah, so are we as Christians to say we shouldn't meditate? No, it's how we define meditation.
Yeah.
What are we meditating on?
Yeah.
Are we meditating on Yahweh and his word? Are we spending time with God in prayer?
Yeah.
Or are we, giving into the Far Eastern religion, or what's much more risky in the West is this new age idea, right?
Yeah.
So yoga and meditation can go along with that new age spirituality. And I think that's a risk to any of our listeners.
Which picks and chooses from a lot of the Eastern religions.
It does. And so I do think, can you practice yoga as a Christian? I would say yes, but be careful.
And how?
Yeah,
right?
Because how you do it matters.
Yeah, I mean, a Hindu would meditate for the purpose of destroying the illusion of this world and being more connected with Brahma.
Yeah.
A Christian would meditate with the desire to center themselves on Christ, on God, and to be closer with Him, on His Word, right? That's in Scripture.
Yeah.
Meditate on your Word, right?
And I would say, is yoga a spiritual reality for you or not is a big defining factor in whether or not you ought to do it. Because for me, like, I'll put on the video and I'll feel my hamstrings will feel a little looser when I'm done. There's no spiritual component for me. But I do think there are some people who are dabbling in, well, what spiritual benefit do I get from yoga?
Yeah.
And I think that's a risky thing, because it does tie into this new age theology that's really wreaking havoc in the West.
Yeah, I think along those same lines, I'd love to just point out the fact that, like, in India, I don't know, we just get this idea of Hinduism and Buddhism that's like, it's this like super peaceful, enlightened. And yeah, you have sort of like the shaman or the monk who's sitting by the river in some sort of ascetic ceremony or whatever. But man, these things are not inherently peaceful. We talked about a lot of extremism in Islam.
Yeah.
I mean, I went to
it looks different sometimes.
Yeah,
right?
I went to visit a church in one of the states in India, and we drove 20 hours in a car.
Wow.
And we went to visit them, and in the village over the day before, a Hindu extremist group had locked whole family and all of the other Christians inside of their home as they were worshiping, and burned the place to the ground with them inside. And it was simply because they're Christians.
Yeah.
And if you've ever seen Slumdog Millionaire, one of the biggest plot points of that movie is that Hindu extremists came and killed people in this guy's Islamic ghetto.
Yeah.
Look at Sri Lanka. They've had years, decades and decades of a brutal, horrifying civil war What's the, Sri Lanka is almost 90% Buddhist.
Yeah.
Like the heart of man is corrupt.
Well, and especially the difference between like the Muslim or the Christian extremists that we've talked about in the past and the extremists of the far Eastern religions is it's really birthed out of a lack of value for life, right? Life, there's no value system because you exist and then you die, or you kind of don't even exist. And when we're talking about Hinduism, you don't even exist. You're not even a reality. So life has no value.
Yeah.
And I don't matter. You, like you said earlier, like we don't matter. All that matters is Brahma. And if we kill someone, they're just going to be reabsorbed in or reincarnated, right? So life has less of a value system placed upon it.
There's one of these organizations called themselves the Hand of Brahma.
Yeah.
And they believe that they were actually acting on behalf of that force. Behorf of the force.
It's a new word.
And so, I mean, I say all that not to just like slam India and Sri Lanka. I say all that to say like those who borrow from this religion in order to create peace as far as their own standard, know what you're borrowing from.
Yeah.
And know why you think these things, because there are a lot of really deep, dark roots that I think you may be shocked by if you dug in.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's good. And so how would we go about, like, we've all 7 previous episodes we've talked about just kind of the heart behind, but also maybe some strategy behind sharing Jesus with people who believe differently than we do. What are some things that we would focus on as we try to share Jesus with somebody who is Hindu?
There's 2 things that I learned while in India. The first is that with the vast amount of religious texts in Hinduism, they love the Bible. They're super interested in the Bible. They think Jesus is like an enlightened person. They like talking about religious texts. And so I would just say like there is a lot of pretext that you maybe would have to have with a Western friend or neighbor that you wouldn't have to have with somebody who believes in Hinduism.
Yeah.
And saying like, hey, let's talk about enlightenment. Let's talk about freedom. Do you believe in sin? Like, what is sin? What is karma?
That's interesting because it's almost like the Romans, right? In the Bible, they believed in so many gods that they're like, yeah, okay, your God is one of the gods, right?
Yeah.
And so, or the Babylonians, same idea. Like when you believe in a polytheistic religion, it's like, bring all your gods, and so it is interesting that would be a part of this.
I think a lot of the times, there's a lot of sort of purported miracles in Hinduism, and so there is a whole evangelism method that takes people to the miracles of Jesus to start the conversation.
That's interesting.
And so if you want to do that, I think also the reason that a lot of these families worship specific gods that they worship is they have a story from a family member or personally of some way that worshiping that God has benefited them.
Right.
And I would just encourage you, like I did in the Buddhist podcast, to say, share your story.
Yeah.
Let them know, what has God done in your life? What are the things he's freed you from? How are you walking with him? What kind of peace does it create in your heart? And then a lot of times, this one is a little more of a direct affront, but I would just say like they're going to be very open to Jesus because, like you said, they can just add him to the lot, right? But I would press them on the uniqueness of Christ and his own claims to not be anything other than the way.
Yeah, and I think also we can kind of introduce the idea of a personal God, right? This God who created us, who loves us, who gives us value. I mean, can you imagine being someone who lived your whole life thinking your life has no value outside of what you can produce or the moralistic ability that you have to be reincarnated in a better way the next life? Like all of a sudden you're introduced to the idea that your life has inherent value because of the Creator. Yeah. And that's a fascinating topic for them. And then the idea that then leads to a conversation on the afterlife, that God wants to be with you, that he wants to not just absorb you, but spend eternity with you, and what that looks like. And so I think as you share your story, as you talk about understanding their religion, it opens up the door to talk about these differences that I think they're already interested in. and then bring those to bear on your conversation.
Yeah, in India, man, everything's religious.
Yeah.
Everything's religious.
Yep.
And so don't be afraid of religious conversations with your Hindu friends.
Yeah.
It's honestly, it's on their lips, it's in their families, it's everywhere.
Yeah, and then see where it goes, right? I mean, see where God takes it and the doors that he opens up. But it's really important as we wrap up this whole series, it's really important, no matter what religion you're talking about, you have to understand, at least not become an expert, but you have to understand what they believe. You have to care enough to understand.
Yeah.
Because the beginning of a conversation, I mean, it's the old like adage, people don't care about what you know until they know that you care. Like it's that adage. You have to care enough to know about what they believe. So ask questions, and then think through ways that you think they might be interested in the truth of what the gospel presents. Yeah,
Paul provided us a model in Acts 17 in Mars Hill when he spoke to the
Greeks.
Yeah, the Greeks, and he talked their philosophical language, man. Yeah. He spoke to their religion, and he talked about the unknown God, right? Yeah. And so I would encourage you to do the same. Yeah. Educate yourself. You don't have to be an expert. And remember, too, what you read online may not be what your friend thinks. Yeah. So ask them what they think in light of what you've read online. Yeah, that's good. And ask for that in your sex.
Well, we've enjoyed walking through this series with you. Thank you guys for listening. And as always, if you've enjoyed this series, like, share, send it out on social media, text it to your friends, whatever it takes to get the word out. And we're excited to be with you for a new series, next episode. So check us out for that episode coming your way in just a few weeks. And
see you guys soon.
Yeah, we'll see you soon.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the WellCast. As always, don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends about us. For more information about the Well Community Church, visit thewellcommunity.org.